Open Minds Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs, they're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found his skull. Are you guys going to want to come film this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sighting of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, bizarre-ites, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that they call Shane Squatch, and alongside me I have the one that they call the big bad Boo Daddy Orin Felix.
Daddy, chill.
Another rousing introduction. You're getting better at this.
Hey, man, I'm just going to keep rolling with it until we get to a point where it's just absolute ridiculousness, and that'll just be our thing, man. We're just going to come in with a wrestler announcer voice, and I'm just going to fine-tune it a little bit better. I got to add the sound effect, though, so it sounds like I'm in like a live room at the stadium, but I'll get there eventually.
I think you're well on your way. So,
well, I mean,
I've really enjoyed you coming into your own as fight promoter Shane Jones. So,
hey, man, I mean, you got Alex Jones, man. He's going to fight, too. I got to have him as my side-by-side. He's my tag team partner, Alex Jones.
You Jones boys are just something else.
We're the Jones team. Well, we need a better one. We're
like the Joe Bros or something?
The Joe Bros, yes, that would work. The Jones Bros. And, Alex just gets ridiculous. That's just what we do. You know, when he comes into the match, he just, like, takes off out of the back door, and he's just screaming at everybody, and then the audience is just going off, and everybody's yelling, and Alex Jones is screaming, and everything's just crazy. And then Alex is tired. And
He's sleepy time right now.
That's the end of the match.
A nice place I go to, and I'm asleep.
That's how it goes. That's all we can deal with.
Okay. And in something totally unrelated to that, the next YouTube live stream we're going to do for Bizarre Inquiries is going to be May the 1st. It's going to be on the Open Minds Media YouTube channel. It's going to be at 7:15 Eastern time. And if you guys want to either be a guest, or you want to contribute an article or a question or anything of that nature, or pop into the chat, you guys know how to do that. Just do all the internet things.
Just please come with the same energy as Alex.
Answer the question.
That's what I want to hear if you guys pop in as a guest. I want to hear you guys yelling at us like Alex Jones. You got to bring the full aura of the wrestling, angry, fighting techniques of everything. But on another side note, before I get too off into an Alex Jones tangent, yet again, the Patreon is still currently under construction, so hopefully you guys are sticking around with us. But on the flip side of that, I've been adding some little new perks to the tiers that say coming soon. So if anybody kind of wants to see some of the stuff that's in the works, it's starting to pop up on there. But like I said, give it about a month or so, and everything should be back up and fully running. But on the flip side of that, since the Patreon is currently under construction, if anybody wants to catch live access to the show, anything like that, Orin, how can they do that?
Well, you can check out, again, the Open Minds Media YouTube channel. When we're doing these kind of live, I guess, what are they? You're the internet man. Live streams of the episodes, is that what they are?
Yeah, they're live streams, but it's mainly like, you guys kind of get to be like a fly on the wall, It's not like the typical live shows where it's like back and forth with the audience, kind of like how we do on Bizarre Inquiries. We're doing the main show. It's kind of like you get to sit as a fly on the wall, have an awesome conversation, and one thing we might start doing towards the end, if people start popping into the lives, at least when we have a guest, I mean, we could always do it, of course, when we're doing our deep dive episodes, but maybe towards the end of the episode, we'll kind of leave a window for questions from the guest on whatever today's topic is, whether it's what we're talking about or to the guest that we have on. But if anybody wants to pop into the lives every week, that's definitely something we can do with you guys so that you guys can start contributing to the show and getting a shout out if you guys want.
And see this shit show in all its natural glory.
Yeah, because you guys don't realize how much I edit. At least when I read, I'm sure you guys notice because I see the comments.
Some of them are edited a goodly amount. So.
Dude, speaking of funny comments and editing, there was actually a comment on Spotify, and I think this is hilarious, so I'm going to make reference to it. They said that every time I read, they feel like they're in that scene from Billy Madison with the Today, Junior.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not. I mean, Billy Madison's great, but...
You got to laugh at yourself. If you can't laugh at yourself, then you're just going to get mad when everybody else laughs. And I mean...
At least you didn't piss your pants. I mean, because if peeing your pants is cool, consider me Miles Davis.
Hey, man, you can't see what I'm doing under this desk. You don't even know if I'm actually wearing pants underneath this desk. I could have been doing this whole show bottomless for all you know, man. You don't know.
This is true. You've got me there. I can neither confirm nor deny the pants situation over there.
The fun of podcasting and being on live meetings is as long as there's a desk, you have no idea what's going on with the bottom half.
Yeah. This is true. Shayn, if anyone wants to be a guest on the show or get up with us for any reason whatsoever, why don't you tell them how they can do that?
Number one, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys can call or text the hotline. That number is 313-364-1551. And if you happen to miss that, you guys can find that down in the show notes.
And all this shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description. All right, y'all, we have an awesome guest tonight. I'm super excited for this gentleman to come on and talk to us and hang out for a little bit. We've got author, musician, and host of the Strange Familiars podcast, Mr. Timothy Renner. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Long time no chat, right?
Yeah, we just talked, a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, and actually, it was completely by accident that we were supposed to set up a guest this week, and I didn't realize that, he references your book all the time on the show, but I didn't put two and two together after our conversation, so it was one of those weird things where it kind of fell into place, like, as it was supposed to, and then I told Orin who we were having on this week, and he was like, wait, we're having Timothy Renner on? I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, perfect. I've been talking about his books recently on the show. I'm like, oh yeah, right, that's that. All right, now I'm connecting the dots here.
No, it's not just recently. I've been talking about them ever since I read them, and for all you longtime listeners, Mr. Renner is one half of the writing team of the Where the Footprints Ends books, which I've talked about ad nauseum on the show, so super cool to finally get to talk to him and get some of this information and thoughts and theories straight from the horse's mouth and not just me repeating them. So,
well, I'm very, very proud of those books. I think, I think they should have been written 30 years before we wrote them, but nobody had written those books. So it was time to write them. So I was happy to bring Josh on as a co-author. He's a great friend and a fantastic author and researcher. So very, very proud of this.
Well, you definitely should be. I mean, anybody that'll listen, I tell them, they're some of my favorite paranormal, high strangeness books I've ever read. Just the way you go about the information in the books and, tying the Bigfoot phenomena in with folklore and different paranormal phenomenon. I think it's just really fascinating, and it really sheds a new light on the Bigfoot material. We hear a lot of the same things repeatedly in the community, and it's just a totally new way of looking at the material. And it really opened my eyes to a lot of the connections between different paranormal phenomena. And that's, something we talk about a lot on the show. So I feel like a lot of kind of what I talk about and what we talk about on the show, I've basically been inspired by your books. So I'm going to try to quit fanboying over here, but no, I just cannot say enough good things about the Where the Footprints Ends books. I mean, if any of you listeners out there have not read them, as soon as you get done listening to this episode, go out and buy them and read them. You will be glad you did.
Yeah, I think, look, I've written a bunch of other stuff, but I think whenever I go, those will probably be the things most known for or the biggest mark I leave on the world. We'll see. Hopefully I can make a bigger mark. But as of now, I think that's what I'll be remembered for more than anything else.
I certainly think you will be. Shayn, do you have anything you want to add in? I've got some questions and topics I wanted to ask Mr. Renner about, but do you have anything before I hop into those?
Please call me Timothy.
Okay, Timothy.
Mr. Renner. Tim or Timothy's fine.
No, you can hop right in. The only thing that I might want to lay out at some point, at least, is we'll probably give him a little bit of a shout out for the podcast, let everybody know a little bit about the podcast too. But we're already talking about the book, so we might as well stay on the path of the book and get into a little bit of Where the Footprints End.
Yeah, so there's just a couple different topics that you talk about in the books that I've just found especially fascinating, and I kind of wanted to pick your brain about, and maybe just have you kind of talk about to the listeners, because it's things that aren't, talked about a lot in the community. One of the things that I thought was the most fascinating, and I think I've mentioned this briefly on the show before, but these kind of Bigfoot connections with like wild man and the like European green man lore. And you even talk about connections with Santa Claus in, I believe it's volume 1. And that I just thought was like mind blowing. When I read that, I was like, oh my God, how have I never seen these connections with, Santa Claus and the wild man and the Bigfoot connections? Would you mind just kind of filling in our listeners a little bit about your thoughts and theories on that subject?
Well, I think I don't know if it was the chapter or the sub-chapter is called Christmas Time in the Wild Men. I think it's the sub-chapter heading. I think it was in my gifting chapter. I went over that. And there's a reason for that. I mean, if you look at folk traditions all over the world, these wintertime holidays almost always have some kind of wild man associated with them. The Pennsylvania Dutch, we have the Belsnickel. There's various wild men throughout Europe. They give them different names. Krampus, of course, and the Perkten, et cetera, et cetera. Hans Trapp is another one. And this wild man tradition, it's just associated with Christmas. Why is this? I don't exactly know why. But Krampus, of course. And there is, people have this idea that, Halloween is the thinning of the veil, and that's the spooky time of the year. Really, like until recent times, Christmas would have been the real spooky time. Like people, there's a reason why there's ghost stories told around Christmas. The Christmas Carol being the most famous one, but hundreds and hundreds of years, people told ghost stories around Christmas. Christmas was, it's the darkest time of the year, and right there at winter solstice. So I think there's that plays into it. Santa Claus himself. There's a book called Santa Claus, Last of the Wild Men, which he's pretty well established. He comes from, of course, there's St. Nicholas, who was a real saint, but he's blended with some of these wild man traditions. Belsnickel's a big example of one. When I started looking into the Belsnickel thing, it's, they come from the mountains howling. They bang on doors and windows, and they have a whole, they frighten people to death. They were quite frightening. I mean, there's stories in the newspaper I dug out of people being frightened to death, literally, by Belsnickels knocking on their windows at night and stuff. So, it just kind of fit together. I just like, wow, this is Bigfoot activity, Beyond that, they've become a lot of questions. Why? I'm not exactly sure, but it's there, it's there.
Yeah, and how you lay it out, it makes perfect sense, and the pieces just fit so seamlessly. Like I said, when I read that subchapter, I was just like, oh my God, this is the coolest theory I've ever read. And Shayn, I think I've mentioned that a little bit on the show before when we were talking about like doing a Halloween or a Christmas episode, but Tim probably did far more justice to it than I did. So I'm glad you actually got to hear this theory.
That chapter, the gifting chapter and the women in white chapter, are my favorites that I wrote.
Well, I've got some questions about the woman in white.
I was going to say,
get to that,
we're going to have to definitely drop it on this episode.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about it on Inquiries, but I want to get your guys' back and forth on this one too. Hold on tight, guys. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break.
But in the meantime, don't forget to follow Bizarre Encounters on Instagram and Facebook, and don't forget to check out Open Minds Media on YouTube and TikTok. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or spark up a conversation. We love getting to know you guys.
And now back to the show.
Well, yeah, I guess if you don't mind, we can just jump right into that. So another chapter in volume 1, I believe, is when you're laying out the woman in white and Bigfoot connections. And this is something I wasn't that familiar with prior to reading the book.
No one. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying no one made that connection before. And in fact, when I told Josh I was going to write that chapter, he said, you will not get a chapter out of that. And I didn't know for sure that I would either, but
it's one of the longer chapters, isn't it?
There's something there. I said, I'm telling you, there's something there.
Would you mind kind of telling our listeners a little bit about your information that you found about that subject?
Yeah. So for me, it started with Sasquatch Chronicles. And years ago, he had a show. It was a subscriber show. So I don't think it's free to listen to. I think you have to be a subscriber. And it was called We Need Help. And basically, it was these two brothers who were having repeat encounters with creatures, Bigfoot creatures on their property. They lived in the same neighborhood. And pretty intense episode. And it really caught my attention because it had a green Bigfoot in it, which is another one of my favorite things. I love green Bigfoot. People often, because of the podcast, because of the books and stuff, they'll send me like Bigfoot statues and stuff. And so I don't collect any Bigfoot except for green Bigfoot. If you find me a green Bigfoot statue, now that's something. But I kind of say like I don't need all this Bigfoot stuff, but green Bigfoot I collect because I just love the whole thing. In any case, besides that, they did a follow-up show, and Wes was talking about it, and he said, these brothers, they're seeing, besides these Bigfoot creatures, they're seeing this weird old woman in white. She always wears white, and she's got shoes that are too big for her feet. They said almost like clown shoes, and she's walking around, and they were so terrified of these creatures that they said when she walked up like towards this ridge where they could hear the creatures howling and breaking branches and stuff, one night they tried to stop her. And she just didn't. She ignored them and just walked up there. And they thought, well, she's dead. They felt the creatures were that aggressive. She comes back down, I think the following day, and they see her coming down, and they're so amazed, like, what is she doing? And they walk up to her, and they're asking her, like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what is it? And she wouldn't answer. And I think the way it went, and I may not have the quote exactly right, is one of the brothers said, I command you to stop. And she stopped and turned and looked at him. I think she gave him a creepy smile and just disappeared. Right? And I know this bothers people. This bothers like the flesh and blood crowd. They don't want any of this kind of, woo stuff to do with this. But if you're going to take witnesses and you're going to say, we're going to believe them when they talk about hairy ape-like things in the woods, and then they start reporting other strange things, and you say, well, we don't believe that. Well, that's not how it works. If you're going to take their word on one thing, you have to take their word on everything. So in any case, I was in the chat rooms for Sasquatch Chronicles, and I saw a bunch of people posting like, you know what? I saw a weird woman wearing white, and I drove down the road and I saw Bigfoot like right after that. And it was, not a ton of them, but a few accounts here and there. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Then I had on my show, there was a guy, I don't think he does the podcast anymore. They did an occult podcast called Charm the Water. And they started talking about seeing these with like devil monkeys. They didn't know the name of them. They weren't familiar with it. And I told him, I said, I think I sent him an email, and I said, you're about to have an encounter with a woman in white. And they were like, what are you talking about? We already have. And they told me this whole story about this woman, this sort of specter woman in white that was around their property. I went on a Bigfoot investigation here, a little bit south of here in Maryland, and they're telling me all these stories about all these encounters they're having around the area. And I said, well, what else weird is happening here? And they said, oh, my husband saw like a ghost of a woman in white like walk up the driveway. I was like, okay. Then their neighbor had all of these different encounters he was telling me about. And he said he had a place. He's like, I'll take you there, but we have to camp there for 10 days or something. I didn't know this fellow well enough that I wanted to camp with him for 10 days. But he called it Bigfoot Valley. And I know where this is. It has to be where he described. I'm pretty sure I know about where it is. It's in Pennsylvania. It's along the river. The areas I like to hike in. In any case, he said one day he was there and he was up in a tree stand. And he had Bigfoot activity all around. And he said this young woman in white walked under his tree stand and left something on the ground. I'm trying to remember the details. He for some reason, I think it was like some kind of ritual thing, some kind of like witchcraft kind of thing or something. and walked out. And he went down and he tried to like stop her. And she, again, it was the kind of thing where she would not pay attention to him. She just, like, he's trying to get her attention, and she's just walking away like, you know, he's not there. So all this happens. I meet a fellow in Michaud Forest, and he had several different encounters in different places all around the forest. And the first place he took me to was a place called Pond Bank. And this is about a mile from his encounter where he saw a creature. And he says, I wanted to bring you here first because there's a woman in white legend here. I know you're interested in that. And there's this whole woman in white legend associated with this woman kind of drowned her baby kind of things, kind of like a La Llorona or whatever that's called. A similar legend to that. So here we have that. I think there was another guy. Yeah, there was another guy up in the northern part of the county. So I'm collecting all these local stories, and they all seem to have this woman in white connection too. Like, okay, I feel like there's something here. So I start doing research, and I'm like, well, I have to look up women in white stuff. And there was a family in Austria, one of the royal families there, and there was a woman who appeared, and she would be a portent of death. You know, if you saw her, that meant somebody in the royal family would die. And they said her name was Ursula, which happens to be my daughter's name, but they said that was sort of a medieval version of Perchta. So now I'm like, okay. So I look up Perchta. Now, this is where it broke open for me. So Perchta, some people call her a goddess. She's more like a sort of one of these fairy woman kind of entities, you know. And she can appear as old or young. She hag-like or young and beautiful. Mm-hmm. She has one or both feet are giant bird feet, either a swan or another bird, which is very significant if you think about that woman in the Sasquatch Chronicles story wearing the shoes too big for her body. But also, if you think about those famous three-toed tracks in many, many Bigfoot stories, they look like bird feet. Giant bird feet. So there's that. And she wore white, always wore white, whether she was, appeared as a young woman or an old hag. But the thing that really broke it up for me is she has two groups that follow her. One is called the Heimchen. And the Heimchen are the souls of dead children that she's lured away off into the woods. And the Heimchen take the form of orbs, glowing balls of light. And what do we see around Bigfoot all the time? Glowing balls of light. And people report it. Even Flesh and Blood folks will report about the orbs. We'll tell you they're out there. The other retinue she has that follow her around were the Perchten. And these were hairy wild men. So there's explicit in that story. The hairy wild men follow her around with the balls of light. This woman in white. And that broke it open. But then I started looking at folklore all over the world. There's the apple tree man in England. He's the wild man, of the orchards there. Old woman in white. It helps him guard the orchards. I found stories all over the world, and I'm forgetting the folkloric names for them at this point, but Russia, Southern Europe, I think Italy, around that area, Northern Africa, America. I think the only place in the world I haven't found a woman in white and wild man legend is the Far East at this point. And I'm certain there's one there. I just haven't found it yet. That's how ubiquitous it is. And since I wrote that chapter, especially when the book first came out, people were emailing me, not every day, but maybe once a week, maybe 2 times a month. I would get emails of people giving me other examples. Here's another example of this, like folklore. So it's just everywhere. It's absolutely ubiquitous, and it's amazing. I cannot tell you why, but I can only say that the connection's there. It's explicit.
Something that kind of came in my mind when I was reading back through or thumbing back through your books in preparation for tonight's interview. And it wasn't something that I was super familiar with the first time I read the books, but I believe it's an Eastern European legend about like a witch crone type figure called the Baba Yaga.
Oh, yeah.
And in this folklore, this witch that lives in a clearing in the middle of a forest, and she lives in a hut that has chicken's feet. And it just kind of clicked when I thumbed back through the Woman in White chapter. She's not explicitly like a woman in white type figure, but do you think there could be some sort of connection there?
Yeah, I think, folklorically speaking, Baba Yaga and Perkta very closely related. Are they the same entity? I don't know. Who can say? They're things from folklore, but they certainly feel very closely related. And again, somebody sees this hag-like woman in the woods and then sees big three-toed tracks. It's easy to come up with, oh, that's Baba Yaga's hut. She's got those big chicken legs that carry her hut around. So yeah, I think there's definitely a connection there.
There may be a connection here. There may not be, but I was kind of trying to look this up while you guys were talking about it. Are you guys somewhat familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh?
A little bit, yeah.
A little, yeah.
So there's Gilgamesh, and then there's the wild man character, and Enkidu, if I'm not saying it correctly, Enkidu. But in the beginning of it, he has this like love fascination named Shamhat, 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 and she basically like brings him into like civilization and everything, but she's described as like a translucentish kind of green, and it's saying on here from what I was reading that she has the ability to take form of whatever she wants. So I mean, like this love connection with the wild man, I don't know if it's loosely based, but it might be somewhat familiar. I mean, at least the pictures that I'm seeing of her seem that she has like a greenish hair, but she seems to be in some type of like a whitish billowy dress. So I mean, there also might be a connection there.
I would count it. Some of these things, some of the creatures' counterparts aren't necessarily, women in white dresses, right? Some of them are, but they'll mention like it's the female counterpart is a white creature, for instance, So there's that sort of female in white connection. So
it makes reference to a nature spirit, so I know that's part of the connection too.
Yeah, and often. Well, other things I wanted to bring up is, regarding the three-toed tracks, that the symbol, which, people might know as a rune, it's like a Y with the line down the middle. I'm trying to remember I don't remember the name of the rune off the top of my head from the Elder Futhark. But people are familiar with it. It almost looks like a upside down peace sign or something. In the Pennsylvania Dutch refer to that as heksenfuss, which translates to witch's foot. So once again, we have the idea of that three-toed bird-looking track as the track of a witch. So it all fits together. It fits together very nicely, like a nice little puzzle for me.
Just to bring it up, is this the symbol you're talking about? Urn? Why? Is that the one?
It's the one for M.
The one for M.
Here it is.
Okay.
Shayn.
Man. So it represents man then, in this one. And then the reverse of that is YR, whatever that means.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the rune. I don't. Yeah. Either way, reversed or upright. I think often you'll see it in barns in hex country, Hexline country. They'll carve that as a sort of protection symbol. They call it the hexenfuss.
See, I'm trying to look up. There's another one that I'm seeing. It says Leben rune, and it looks like I don't know if it's the same thing, maybe just a different name, but just out of curiosity, just bringing it up here. But yeah, I'm assuming these are the same ones. They probably represent the same thing.
Yeah, there's different names for them according to the tradition.
Oh, this is.
I used to know the name for the other name for it, but I'm blanking on it. It's probably in that book. It's probably where you just showed it, Orin.
You looking something up in the book, Orin?
Yeah, I got it right here. Hang on.
Riveting Radio, gotta love posts.
Riveting for all the listeners out there.
I'll clean it up in the post.
So it's on page 127 in volume 2 where you talk about it. It said the runes are recognized not only as a writing system, but as a divination method. It's believed to present Yggdrasil and therefore the mythical power of the universe.
Yggdrasil, yeah, the world tree, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, also known as the witch's foot. So, yep, here it is, right here. Hold that thought. We'll be back in a flash.
But if you guys don't like hearing the ads, then I have a solution for you. You can get ad-free and early access to this show and Inquiries of All Reality on the Open Minds Media Patreon for just $1 a month. That's less than a bag of chips, and it's a great way to support the show and all the hard work behind it. And if you're interested in merch store discounts or premium video versions of episodes, then there are a few other tiers with additional benefits and 7-day free trials available.
And now back to the show. Well, Shayn, do you have anything else before I ask my final kind of topic question I wanted to ask Tim?
No, I mean, we've already made the connection with this one, so yeah, hop on into the next one, man.
Okay, so the last thing I wanted to ask you about, and then I'll give over control of the microphone. But in Volume 2, you talk about this kind of Men in Black-esque couple of entities that appear around a lot of Bigfoot sightings, this kind of man in plaid type situation. And again, that was something I had never heard of before your books. But, you know, we talk about the Men in Black a lot on the show. We did a whole series on John Keel and the Mothman prophecies. I had kind of what I consider a vaguely Men in Black-esque situation happened to me when I was a kid. So this is something that I'm just always fascinated by. Would you talk a little bit about this kind of man in plaid situation?
Yeah, it's quite a interesting connection, and this is not one that, to my knowledge, I don't think I've turned up any witnesses. So this is all stuff from Sasquatch Chronicles and other places, you know, other accounts online mostly that I found. But people who have particularly intense encounters or encounters where they seem to gather evidence like blood or hair or something. Often, not always. Well, I should say sometimes. Sometimes these guys show up and they'll claim to be either from the Department of the Interior or some other government organization. They name 2 or 3 different ones. It's not consistent, but it's consistent that it's a big guy in plaid. They say he's either dressed like a biker or like a lumberjack. Really big guy. One of the witnesses in the book, I think, was 6'9" and said he had to look up at this guy. And this guy is very intimidating. He's very mean and very gruff. And he shows up with a guy that's more businesslike, a smaller guy, you know. And they do kind of a good cop, bad cop kind of thing, where they'll intimidate people and basically say, you know, you're not going to talk about this encounter, you saw a bear, and people say, no, I didn't. And they'll say, oh no, you saw a bear, and you're not going to say otherwise, you know. So it's this whole intimidation thing, you know, don't talk about it. Very interesting, with some very creepy encounters with these guys, and they're just showing up. One of them was from Virginia, and the guy called a game warden, and the game warden actually said, hey, don't be surprised if other people from the government show up, which is weird. Now, I don't think these guys are from the government at all. I think they're something else, you know. Like I said, I do think they're the Men in Black equivalent of the Bigfoot phenomena. And isn't it interesting? They appear more rustic, right?
They fit the phenomenon, like that weird thing that it morphs into fitting the phenomenon.
The Men in Black are more like, you know, a little bit more tech savvy, or more, you know, like dressed up neat, you know, nice suits and stuff. And here for Bigfoot, these guys are a little more rustic, you know. But yeah, they're, you know, people all over the country, and for years and years and years, going back to at least the early 1980s, I think was the earliest account I picked out. So, you know, what's going on? Who are these people? I haven't heard any recently, but for a while there, a lot of these accounts were popping up on Sasquatch Chronicles and so forth.
Have you noticed any like change in the phenomenon as far as like location based? Because one thing we were talking about on a recent episode was the whole idea that Men in Black, when you see them in the United States, you know, they're typically seen driving black Cadillacs. And when you see people end up seeing them in like the UK, for whatever reason, they end up seeming to be driving Jaguars. Like it fits like the region. So have you noticed anything, at least from diving into these guys, that they have maybe little changes depending on like region where they're dealing with things?
They're usually showing up in a black SUV of some sort, some like kind of unmarked black SUV. So, you know, again, sort of the modified, you know, Men in Black have the black cars. These guys are showing up in the, you know, tinted windows, black SUV kind of thing.
I wonder if there would be like changes depending on like country. Like I wonder if there's like a trackable phenomenon that there's these like two guys where one's rustic, one's a little bit more business, and like say for Australia where they have like Yowie sightings, and for example, like I wonder if like they'd still have the same archetype, but maybe like start to kind of change depending on like the region. Like, have you found any of these seen like outside of the United States and any other of the bigger Sasquatch areas?
Too hard. I didn't really look too hard. I didn't even think of, I was so focused on the accounts from America that that's an interesting bit of research I might have to dig into. In Australia, I'm sure they would show up dressed like the crocodile hunter.
I would hope so. That you call that a knife? That's some good intimidation right there.
So, kind of just one last question about the kind of men in plaid phenomenon before I let you guys talk about whatever you want to and I shut up for a while. But do you think that this could have any connection to like the flannel man phenomenon? Because this is something that, again, I wasn't super familiar with when I first read your books, and it seems like it's gaining a little bit of traction in kind of the paranormal community. And it just seems like an odd connection there. Maybe this is like the equivalent of like the Hat Man and the Men in Black. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I literally have that on the other screen. That's the fun. It's funny that you asked.
There's an Easter egg in the book. In that chapter, one of the subheadings is "Plaid is the new black," and that is a nod to Strange Familiars listeners who have been following this sort of flannel man journey on the show. Now, again, this isn't something we came up with. It's something I noticed. John Keel had been talking about it. People have been talking. I've collected accounts from the 20s and 30s and 40s and so forth. So it's been happening. It's nothing we came up with. But I talked about early on Strange Familiars, one of the early episodes, single digit probably. I talked about my wife, who is a skeptic to all this stuff. I said, well, even she's seen something. And she's seen this flannel man entity. And I knew it was a thing because one day, this is years before I wrote any books or started the podcast or anything. I happened to be on some online forum and people were talking about this flannel man phenomenon. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what my wife saw. And she woke me up screaming one night. And by the time I woke up, I was like so groggy, I was like, oh, it's okay. Which is like, before I even opened my eyes, I'm like, it's okay. And, probably shouldn't have done that. Probably should have looked around before I said that. But she said there was this guy standing at our feet and it had a beard and a flannel shirt. And she said, to this day, she's not sure if he was holding an axe or if she sort of put an axe in his hand in her memory because he looked so much like a lumberjack. But she said the odd thing about it is like he looked shocked that she could see him, which is a very interesting detail. And that's come up a lot. Anyway, I mentioned this on the show and I start getting people emailing. I've seen this guy. And we've collected, tons and tons of accounts. At some point, I'll have to write a book on that, but there's so much out there, it just seems daunting. So, yeah, I do think there's a connection. There's somehow, with the checkered shirt, at least. I don't know what that means, but I do think there's something there. Now, what it is, I don't know. I don't know. There's so much variety in these flannel man accounts, from just stuff like people were like, yeah, right before I had this really intense, ghost experience, I just saw this weird guy in flannel and he said something weird to me or something, to people who wake up to the guy in their house and then see him in a bookstore the next day or something, things like that. There's just a huge variety, good experiences, bad experiences, everything with this guy. But the common thing is he's wearing this checked or plaid shirt. So what is it about that? I do not know, but I do think there's a connection there. I don't know what it is yet, but
Well, it's funny you mentioned that story about your wife. My partner Jenny, she had a flannel man, that we now retroactively think was a flannel man encounter. And it was before she was really into the paranormal or anything like that. But she had a very similar situation. She lived in like a very small beach house at the time. And she woke up in the middle of the night and she said there was this guy standing in the door frame. We joked that, she saw the ghost of Kurt Cobain. She said, he had a blue plaid shirt on, had kind of shoulder-ish length sandy blonde hair, and not like a full beard, but a little like scruff beard. And she saw this entity 2 or 3 times, not a super large amount of times, but she said it was never like a scary situation. It was always not positive, but like there's nothing, traumatic about it. And it was just a very odd situation. And, she told me this at the time, and it wasn't until years later when we started hearing about the flannel man situation, and we're like, oh my God. And we put those pieces together and like, that had to be what it was.
Yeah. I'm not surprised at all. And red plaid or red checked is the most common, but certainly we get blue and green and stuff like that too. The common factor seems to be the checked shirt or the plaid shirt. Mm-hmm. But again, yeah, and I've had. Can I ask what year she saw that?
This was probably, I'd say, 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in that range.
So I get them all through time, but honestly, what's weird, and it's a little bit silly, but during the grunge years are where most of my accounts have come from. Huh. Like in the 90s, people were like, yeah, it was right during the whole grunge years thing. So
I have a possible connection with this, at least for the ones where people see them like showing up in their houses, for example. We're always talking about this idea of the phenomenon like morphing and changing, and what it is exactly is always the question. But as far as like the phenomenon changing, of course, it's not going to be like an instant thing that happens overnight. It's going to be this kind of like trickle thing where it turns from one thing kind of into another. So we've been talking about this like Shadow Man experience thing for a long time, talking about how we don't necessarily know what they are, but we kind of guess that they might try to take the shape of something that's semi-familiar to people. And it usually ends up being this like hatted man. And I mean, it depends on, I guess like who ends up having the experience with it. Kind of depends on like what form they end up seeing this thing in. But depending on which theory you kind of view as far as like what shadow people are, them trying to take the form of something that you're familiar with to maybe not induce as much fear, or to try to make you a little bit comfortable so that they can induce fear later on. Like, I wonder if there's a connection with it where it might be somewhat of like this changing phenomenon, that whatever we're kind of viewing as shadow people might be kind of transitioning into this thing, maybe having more stance in this dimension or reality. Maybe they're coming off more as like a two-dimensional thing, and now some of them are kind of learning how to create this like four-dimensional version or three-dimensional version of themselves. Like, at least the standing at the end of the bed thing, I feel like there's a weird connection with shadow people, whether it's like the harnessing energy aspect of it, or it is the phenomenon changing into something else. Like, I feel like there's something there with it.
I mean, I think that the phenomena, all of it, kind of morphs and changes with society. The changing Bigfoot thing, other people noted, like, over time, UFOs, they always stay just ahead of us technology-wise. Airships in the 1800s, before we had balloons, they're the airship encounters or Zeppelins and stuff. Then we get into these sort of Art Deco looking ships, and then the Black Triangles come right before we have the stealth bombers, our own Black Triangle, and it's like they're just ahead of us all the time. The wild man, I believe, is getting wilder. So if you go back to medieval times, the Wadwos and these wild men, they were like wise men of the woods that people would go to for advice and stuff. Mm-hmm. They could speak, they could cast spells, It morphs, and then you go to some of these stories from the 1800s that I collected in my historical Bigfoot books. Sometimes they're wearing shirts, sometimes red flannel shirts, by the way. Just, ragged, torn up. Sometimes they're carrying like old rusty muskets that won't fire, and they have these attributes of humans. Sometimes they're noted as making fires or sitting by fires even. And it's like, okay. And then you go up through time, and nowadays they're our wild man Bigfoot is very wild. It doesn't cook its food, and it's, no clothes, and it's hairy, and it just screams and frightens people and yells. And I wonder if, we're getting further away from nature as time goes on. We live inside. If we don't want to be in the dark, we don't ever have to be in the dark. We can turn lights on all the time and never have to experience the dark. We don't have to experience the change of seasons at all, which I think is a big thing. People you don't have to. You can keep the same temperature in your house year round if you want. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of getting further away from nature, and if the wild man is our connection to that, it's getting necessarily wilder. As we pull away from nature, it gets wilder. even to the point, and this is an idea that, Brother Richard, he's a Capuchin friar that comes on Strange Familiars often, and a lovely human being, and happy to say he's a friend of mine. But he said to me regarding Dogman, he said, because there's a real issue with dog. Like, I know people want to think there's a breeding population of ape men out there, but then if you add this Dogman thing, so now we have a breeding population of wolf men out there. Come on, when is this going to end, folks? Right? What is Dogman but an even wilder representation of the wild man? It's gotten even wilder. It's less human-like. Now it's going to this wolf-like form. You've taken more humanity out of the wild man. So it's like it's getting even wilder. So it's very, very interesting. I do think the phenomena changes over time. All of it.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back with that bizarre stuff you crave.
But just a quick reminder, if you would like to snag some gear from this show, Inquiries of Our Reality, or one of your favorite creatures or topics, hop on over to the Open Minds Media merch store for a wide range of designs and new drops regularly, and t-shirts for the low price of just $15.68. That's oddly specific, plus shipping.
And we're back with the high strangeness. Let's get back into it. Kind of another weird thing to think about. So everybody kind of discusses this whole idea of like tulpas or like thought projection. So kind of along the lines of what you were saying, like if we're becoming like more and more civilized into like this industrial society, if we're projecting thought projection onto being out in the woods and like fantasizing about being that wild man out in the woods, could it be that we're almost like creating these things as like tulpas because we've pushed so far away from it that we angst for it? So we put so much thought projection into being that wild thing again that we're like essentially creating these things ourselves by pushing away from the wild.
I mean, it's always possible. There's the wild man is an archetype, and if you think about, I'm not the best person to explain archetypes, but if you just think about like the mother, right? The mother, this is an archetype. This is like, or, the father, or, you have these sort of archetypal figures. Probably the wise woman or the witch, would be another one. But, wild man, and every society all over the world has a wild man that lives next to him, either in the woods or up in the mountains or in the desert even. Wild men have always been with us. So could it be a thought? Yeah, or could we just be projecting whatever it is onto that, onto what's already there? And it's, I think maybe this stuff kind of pulls from our mind a little bit, and maybe from society in general, whatever's happening in the culture at the moment. I don't know. I don't know how it works, but it does change, and it feels like we have a part in that. How? I don't know.
It's kind of weird, just to make another kind of connection with the Dogman stuff, is I recently had Seth Vanderbroek on, who is from Project Eleazar, and he dives into like all these old biblical connections with like dogmen and everything. And the weird part is when you start diving into like the old biblical connection with dogmen, they almost seem more civil because they are usually described as like they lived in this specific region in India. They were like these dog-headed beings. They used to do trading. They used to get like weapons and everything from like the king of India at the time and everything. So it's kind of like a weird reflection with them that they've kind of gone in like both directions, where you dive into all these ancient aspects of them, and they're still like wild, of course, but they're a little bit more civilized. And maybe kind of connecting with what you were saying, it's because the people were a little bit more wild. So their whole idea of a monster was maybe a little bit closer to what they were. And as we've kind of pushed away from that, that's where it's gotten this crazier and crazier aspect to it.
Yeah, I know there's a whole bunch with the what they call them,
cynocephalies.
Yeah. I think St. Christopher was one. So
St. Francis too.
It's a whole thing. Yeah, I mean, it could have been. I tend to think, was there a race of people with the heads of dogs? Probably not. It's probably more of a symbolic thing, but I don't know. Like St. Christopher was reported to be like super strong, and big, so was there something else going on there? Could be. I'm not a big one to try to like, not everything's in the Bible. And people who like, there's like the whole Nephilim thing where people are just trying to shove Bigfoot into the Bible. Just stop it. They don't mention bacteria in the Bible. They don't mention. There's a lot of things they don't mention in the Bible. You don't have to shove everything in there.
Say, at least from that writing in particular that I was talking about, I think that one came from Marco Polo that he was talking about, but it got like weird in the descriptions where he was talking about like how they bathe themselves, like their trading ways of doing things, like how they can't talk like a normal person, but they can use like sign language. And there's like these multiple like ancient writers that would talk about him. And it's actually weird. It comes in because he dives into biblical stuff, but the aspects that he collects into it come from like the Greeks, the Egyptians. Like it doesn't come from like necessarily like a Christian paradigm. So it almost kind of brings like a weirder aspect to it because not only is it coming from one culture, but it's coming from like multiple cultures, and maybe they are all referencing each other. I'm not 100% sure, but you know, it's not just specifically based in just like one specific lens.
Yeah. I think we'd have dog-headed skeletons, you know.
Hide them with the giants. They're in the basement of the Smithsonian. I know it.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other thing.
I keep saying everybody wanted to raid Area 51. Like, forget that. Let's go raid the Smithsonian or the Vatican. That's where you're going to find the real stuff.
That's a whole. I mean, I believe that goes in the disappearing evidence, and it's in my disappearing evidence chapter in where the footprints end. You read these old newspaper articles. It's like the Smithsonian came and took the bones away because they don't want us to know because it goes against. Well, maybe. I just think that was kind of like, again, the sort of disappearing evidence, the Men in Black of the time. What was the big, science was just changing. On the heels of Darwin. What's scary? Science is scary. Everything's changing. It's proving the world is different than they thought it was. I don't think the Smithsonian has a warehouse full of giant bones. The Susquehannock Indians were reported to be between 6 and 7 feet tall. The men when the Europeans got here, big muscular men. So if you're talking about 8-9 foot skeletons they're finding, okay, that's big for a human. That's not impossibly big for if the Susquehannocks were 7 feet tall, maybe the people they descended from were even taller. To me, it seems okay, like 8 foot. That doesn't seem like a conspiracy to me. It's like, it's like, okay, they're just big people.
I'll throw this in there too. The giant ground sloths that used to be in America, like their skeletons look pretty close to a human skeleton. And I mean, back at this point, this was also the time where they were coming across like mammoth skulls and looking at them upside down and thinking that they were giant cyclops skulls. So I mean, matter of context and looking at them in the correct sense. If you see this thing that just has 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, and it's 8-9 feet tall. That must have been a human, I don't know if they were aware of giant ground sloths at that time.
I'm reminded of that Rick and Morty episode where the dinosaurs come back and they go to some planet and they've made the skeletons all wrong. They thought they walked on their heads.
I still often wonder that with the stuff that we have now. I mean, because when not to get a whole conspiratorial, but like it would almost make more sense with a lot of the dinosaurs if you just flip the arms backwards and they had a little bit more of like a wing look to them, which also fits in with what we think that they're more bird related than they are reptile related. So I mean, super conspiratorial, but
finding is it's changed over time. I know I don't pay great attention to the dinosaur thing, but I know it changes over time. I know they're like, oh yeah, we were wrong about that. We were wrong about the way they looked. We were wrong about the length of their arms, et cetera, et cetera.
They're adding hair or fur onto it, or not fur, but feathers onto it now. So this is something that Orin and I have been talking about for a minute now. The whole idea that all these ancients talking about dragons that we looked at as folklore, it was probably the dinosaurs that we're talking about, because now we're starting to realize as we get farther on that they're looking more like how medieval times dragons were described. And of course, with any folklore, it ends up turning into telephone, like a fisherman's tale. So a guy goes up to kill this giant dinosaur up at a hilltop, and then next thing you know, this thing was like 30 feet tall and it was sitting on a giant mound of gold, and this guy almost died fighting this thing, but everything collapsed in so he couldn't bring any of the gold back, And now it's this folklore thing when it was something that's a little bit more real world than we thought it was.
Yeah. I always think, folklore is it's whispering down the lane, so it changes and it gets exaggerated over time. But there's that like nugget of truth in there somewhere, that there's a reason why this stuff is preserved. Sometimes it's because it was a good story, but often it's because the information was good, and true.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the show, that a lot of these kind of outlandish sounding on the surface folklore tales, there's probably a nugget of truth there somewhere. Before we get too far removed, Timothy, would you tell us a little bit about your new book? I know that you've got something pretty exciting that you've just come out with, and Shayn was telling me a little bit about it before the recording. So I'm curious if you'd tell us a little bit about your new book.
Bizarre Encounters in a different sense.
Yes.
It's called I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories. And it's a book of biographies of hermits from the mid-late 1800s on up to early 1900s. And these are a different kind of wild man, I suppose. These are folks who wanted to live alone. I started doing some stories on them on Strange Familiars. I was surprised how popular the hermit stories were. So I thought, well, I'll write a book. I spent 3 years researching these folks, men and women. At some point, I said, I have to narrow it down because there were hermits everywhere, and way more hermits than you can imagine. Most towns seem to have a hermit, in America around that time. And I said, well, how am I going to narrow this down? And I started collecting photos of them. So I said, well, I'll just use my photo collection. I'll write about those people. So you get to see almost every hermit I write about. I think there are like 3 or 4 of them in the book that I don't have photos of, but the rest of them you actually get to see one or more. Some of them have several pictures of them in there. And then I kind of researched them the best I could. There's a lot of legends, and I tried to parse, their true story from the legends. And there's 30 some hermits in there. A lot of it was, book research and online research and newspaper research and things like that. But some of them I actually went and visited where they were. The Gettysburg Hermit was one of my favorites, and I actually found where his house, the remnants of his house that he built, is on the battlefield in Gettysburg. It's a very difficult place to find. They say it's the hardest part to reach on the Gettysburg battlefield. And we spent a day there. I found both where the footprint of where his cabin was, and he had lived in what they called a cave in the newspaper for a while before he built his cabin. It was actually kind of just boulders kind of laying over top of each other. It wasn't a true cave. Which had created a chamber, and I found that, and there was still a chimney, remnants of a chimney he had built on the side of it, and you could see where he had blocked up the cracks to keep the wind out and stuff.
Wow.
Pretty amazing. I was completely shocked. Kind of doing some trespassing doing that, I guess, because somebody went over there recently, and the guy who, it is national park, but the guy who owns access to it or something, is private land. Had to access it or whatever, and he's like, that guy's like, there's no cave here. Yeah, there is. You just need to look around, buddy. So, because there's a picture of me in the book next to it. I didn't make that up. I found it. But yeah, so I visited a few of them. Super interesting to me. These folks, they just went off to live in nature, and for different reasons. Broken hearts. I think some of them was PTSD after Civil War, and some guys just wanted to live closer to nature. So it's pretty interesting. And I really took 3 years researching it. It's really difficult to research because they're real people, with real stories. I wanted to get it right as best I could. But it's sort of my love letter to these folks who, the idea of second death. You die once when you die, and you die again when everybody forgets you. So it's kind of like saving these folks from a second death,
I'd love to get into some of these guys' stories. And you mentioned that there was a couple women too. So, I mean, we might as well throw one of them in there. But before we get into that, just a quick question. You said that you went to some of these guys' caves and dwellings. Did you luck out enough to find any remnants of them? Like anything they scratched into the wall or anything they left or anything?
I found an old coffee pot around the Gettysburg Hermit's place. But I was there with my buddy Chad, and Chad didn't think I should take it. He thought it was in bad taste to take the old coffee pot. I'm not sure that was his, but it was right there. It was right around that stone chamber or cave, whatever you want to call it. Other than that, there was a guy who lived in a cave in Irving, Massachusetts. They called it Irving Castle. It was just a cave. They called it a castle. You can visit that today. That's on state park land up there. It's a cool little hike. And I went to that, and I really, really wanted to find something of his. I was he was putting his trash somewhere, and that's usually where you find stuff, just a button, anything. And I looked around and around forever, and my son was with me, and I could tell he was just like, all right, Dad, it's time to go. We've been here long enough. I really wanted to find anything that he had left, but I did not, unfortunately.
Hey, maybe I'll end up lucking out on the next one. That next time you find one of those ones that's super hidden, you'll luck out. Maybe you'll find some like dwellings or just even like something they scratch into the wall. Like, I mean, even that would be really cool. You can take one of the like rub offs of it and just be able to hang it up in the studio. Feel like you have some type of connection with them.
In the newspaper article in the Gettysburg Hermit, they mentioned that he had hand dug a well, and that well is still right there by the old cabin. It's so cool, and it's still filled with water. Hundreds of years later.
Wow.
100 plus years later, still got water in it. It's amazing. Like that was cool. So I knew like he definitely dug that well, kind of thing.
Got to take a jar of it just to bring home and put in the studio just for the sake of it.
I've definitely collected stones and stuff from all these places. Right? I have like little bags with like a rock. This rock is from here, and I kind of label it. I don't know why, just like a little keepsake.
Yeah, I feel like it's a connection with them. They're all in the same area, so I mean, you feel like you got some type of like physical connection to these people that you're writing about. But
all right, guys, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And now we're getting back to the bizarre.
Getting into some of these people's stories, I don't know which ones you want to share. I don't know if you want to share different ones that we had talked about last week or not, but you mentioned, like I said, a couple of women that you wrote about, so it'd be cool to dive into one of their stories too.
Yeah, there's Jenny Johannica, and they call her the Hermit Queen of Happy Hollow. I think she was in Indiana. And she had a pretty sad story. She came from Europe, and she was dirt poor over there and married a husband who died. She and her daughter move. I think they end up coming to Chicago. She marries again. That husband dies. She and her daughter then move to Indiana, and then her daughter dies. And I think she's just like, I'm done. Mm-hmm. And she checks out, and goes and lives in, I think she was living in charcoal burner huts. And if you've ever seen them, they're like more primitive than a teepee. They're just like sticks, like just thrown up. And she was living in there for a while. And finally the women in the area built her a little house in Happy Hollow. And the children said she was a witch. I don't believe she was. I think she just liked to live alone. And she had a cart, and she would bring produce and chickens to town, and that's how she lived. She'd sell that and she'd go live alone. The interesting thing about her is I found a cyanotype photo, and it just said like Mademoiselle Johannica on the back of it. And I looked it up and found out she was this hermit, the Hermit Queen of Happy Hollow. And in this photo, and it's hard to see in the book because it's just not that clear, but in the actual photo you can see, they say she was Dutch, since she wore wooden shoes. And you can actually see peeking out from under her skirt, you can see these wooden shoes she was wearing. So, and I think they have, in Indiana, they have the park, and they have a little drawing of her that looks nothing like the picture. It's like a bad line drawing. So, like the Hermit Queen of Happy Hollow used to live here or something like that. A little story about her. And it made me think, I wonder if there's any other images of her anywhere. And I looked, I may have the only photo of this woman anywhere, which is like, it's pretty cool. Like, it's really, really neat to you have this like sudden, like, wow, I think I need to preserve this somehow. It's really neat. So she's one of the women I covered. There weren't a lot in there. The other one, and I'm drawing a blank on her name right now. She was from England, and she lived literally in a bacon box. She said it was her most prized possession. Hold on 1 second. I have to dig up the name. There's too many hermits, and I can't remember every detail of every one.
I mean, with a lot of these hermit stories, while you're looking that up, it's cool to like look into the aspect of it being women, because I mean, most of the time when you think of these hermit stories, you usually think of like men who have had their hearts broken, like you were mentioning, men with PTSD, men that just want to like go off and take off into the woods. Like, you don't usually associate like hermit stories with women. But on the flip side, I mean, you kind of brought up a pretty good point at the end of that one, that the reason why there might not be a lot of these like hermit stories necessarily about women is because they probably just became the local folklore of, that woman who's a witch. So it just wasn't preserved in the same way. It's still there. It's just different wording for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Her name was Alice Grace. Yeah. And she was known as the Little Eaton Hermit, the Cox Bench Hermit, the Derbyshire hermit. She's in England. And she said that bacon box is literally just a wooden box. The photos in the book show her sitting in it, was her most prized possession because that kept the weather off of her. And she grew up poor. Once her parents died, for a while, she rented a stable to live in, which is, this is back before housing laws and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then she couldn't even afford that. So she just started what they called sleeping out in England at the time. And she actually got tickets written to her and stuff. And she did it for years. She didn't want to go to what they called a workhouse, is where they sent the homeless over there. And so she ends up, living in this box. She had to move several times. She's reported in the paper. And then because she's a human interest thing, they send photographers out and they take pictures of her and they start selling postcards. Well, then people get interested and they want to see her. So she was arrested again because she had a whole crowd, she's disturbing the peace, basically, this crowd of people around her. Eventually she starts telling fortunes with cards and makes, she charges very little, for that, and stays out of the workhouse for quite some time. She gets older finally, and she can't do it anymore. And this happens to a lot of these hermits. Eventually, they have to go to some kind of county home or something. And the same thing happened with her. She went to the workhouse for the last years of her life, but her goal was to just stay out. And a lot of these people, someone asked me, like, well, how do you define hermit? And there's such a variety of people in the book that I just think it's people who want to live alone. That's the simplest definition I can give. It's just people, for whatever reason, they say, I want to live alone. Because they don't have to be out in the wilderness. There's a couple that live in the middle of cities, but they were completely alone. They completely kept to themselves and lived alone.
So I guess before we start wrapping up completely on the hermit stuff, I'd love to dive into whatever one was your absolute favorite to write about, whatever person you found to be the most fascinating, whatever one is the closest to your heart.
John Stink. He became my favorite. In a way, they're all my favorites. And the first one in the book, William Woodruff, is the first kind of the one that kind of kicked it all off for me. So he'll always have a soft spot in my heart for him. And he was mistaken for a wild man, so there's a Bigfoot connection with him too. But overall, John Stink has been sort of the most fascinating one. And so he was they called him the living ghost. So he was an Osage, Native American. He was Osage. And his Osage name was Hotamoi. And the story with him is he died and came back to life. And according to the newspaper or the different accounts, some say he did it up to 3 different times. He died and came back to life. And I think that I have something like 14 different ways he died in the book, according to newspaper reports. Some have it as tuberculosis. Some have it as in a fight with another tribe. Some have it as, alcohol poisoning. It goes on and on, various, fevers and so forth. But the sort of account is the same. He comes back. He comes back from the grave. They literally have him, they take him off and put him in the burial grounds. I don't think he's buried, but he's, and I should say, I'm reporting what was reported in the newspapers by white reporters. I'm not sure how accurate any of this is to actual Osage, death customs and so forth. Well, I'm just, this is what I read in the newspapers. But he comes back, and his people are like, no, no, the dead need to stay dead. And they rename him at that point. They said, not Hotamoi, John Stink, because, the dead stink. They rename him, and he goes and just lives by himself. I've several pictures of him on the streets of Pawhuska, Oklahoma. He would just sleep in the middle of the street. He had dogs. He loved dogs. He wasn't like a mean person. I think he just wanted to live alone. Very imposing looking guy. Some of the photos, he was over 6 foot tall, and he always has a cigar hanging out of his mouth and a knife on his hip. Some of the pictures, he looks like somebody you do not want to mess with. But he was kind. He was generous. At some point, there's a oil strike on Osage land, and they become the richest people in the world per capita. And he gets a cut of that. Everybody in the tribe gets a cut of that, including John Stink. And he could have built a mansion. He could have lived in a mansion if he wanted to. He chose to live outside. He wanted to live outside. He said, living inside makes me sick. I want to live outside. So he lives outside with his dogs. There's a report in the paper at one point. There's a rabies outbreak in Pawhuska, and they said every dog has to be muzzled except John Stink's dogs. They actually made an exception for him. He was so well known and his dogs were so well behaved that they said not his dogs, but everybody else's dogs have to be muzzled. Shortly after that, there's another report of a marshal who shot every one of his dogs. And it's really, really sad because I think it was just done out of cruelty. Everybody knew who he was. Obviously, in the paper, it said everybody's dogs but John Stink's. Everybody knew who he was. And this guy kills his dogs. And John Stink vows, he says, I will never come to Pawhuska again. I'm out of here. He keeps to that. He revisits it one time, to my knowledge. But for the most part, he stays outside of town from then on. He kind of camps out around these different creeks and stuff in the area. Eventually buys some property. Puts up a barbed wire fence. He just wants to be left alone. He buys a car, but he doesn't drive. So he just sits in his car and smokes his cigars. Pretty funny guy. And he's next to a golf course, and he said he would just laugh at the white man like playing golf. He thought it was the silliest thing. But he has certain friends that come over. Certain people know him. One of the people that worked at the golf course would visit him, and he had another Osage neighbor. They became very close friends. And very generous. He gives $1,000 to every one of the local churches. He gives a bunch of money to the American Legion Hut, the Osage American Legion Hut. He might be almost solely responsible for building that. He would pay for tuition for Osage girls to go to private school. Like, incredibly generous guy, and just a really neat, interesting human. And eventually he falls off a ladder, breaks his leg when he's in his 70s, and develops pneumonia and dies for real this time, finally. They said he had a Catholic ceremony and then an Osage ceremony, both. And his dogs were just sitting at his casket, just like right by his side, even. And the interesting thing, even though he's said to have come back so many times, as far as I know, there's no ghost stories about John Stink, but there are ghost stories about his dogs. They say around Pawhuska, you can still hear his dogs howling at night. So, but wow. Yeah, he became my favorite. I absolutely love John Stink. I might pull that chapter out and add some extra information and some more photos and do just a little book just on John Stink alone. I just find him so interesting.
No, that's awesome.
I started looking up pictures of John Stink because I want to see what this guy looked like, because he seems like he kind of has like a thing about him. And it's funny because I'm looking it up and most of it actually comes from your page. So it seems like you're probably one of the primary people that are keeping this guy's legacy alive.
There's to my knowledge, there's another John Stink collector. We get into bidding wars over his photos sometimes. But yeah, I'm not sure there's too many out there. There was one book that was written, I think in the 1970s, that, yeah, so the color, the drawing is mine. Where
this one?
No, that one right there. So that's my drawing of John Stink. It's called John Stink Walks Towards Life. He's kind of walking away from the skulls to the flower, and those are actual flowers that you'll find in around Pawhuska there.
There it is.
Oklahoma.
Bring it a little bit closer so people can see it a little bit better.
When he died, they said they put his rosary in one hand and a cigar in the other. When he finally died. So yeah, yeah. This
guy looks like somebody that I'm surprised there's not folklore in the area where somebody may have confused him as like a Sasquatch, because he's kind of got that build to him, He's definitely got like the wild man build to him.
He is an interesting guy. I just was completely fascinated by him. So yeah, he ended up being my favorite for sure. I mean, a name like the Living Ghost doesn't hurt either.
Yeah, no, definitely not. That definitely would catch my attention right off the bat.
Yeah. He had great PR. I mean, John Stink, the Living Ghost, you can't beat that.
He always seemed to wear that bandana around his head, around his head too. I don't think I've seen a picture of him without that bandana tied around his head.
And without the cigar, because it seems like every single picture that I see of him, he's got the stick and he's got the cigar.
Yeah, he liked the cigar for sure.
There you go. You got a Halloween costume, man. It seems like a pretty straightforward one to make, right?
I would love to go down there and actually talk to some Osage and see A, if anybody remembers him or anything, and B, like how accurate these reports are to their customs and so forth.
Stay tuned, guys. This is our last break.
But if you guys enjoyed this show and think we deserve it, please leave a review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify or any other podcatcher you use. Your continued support is what makes this show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help this show grow and improve. So thank you guys. Now feel free to skip past these ads so we can get back to the show.
And now we're getting back to the bazaar.
So just for the sake of it, I think I asked you on inquiries, but also just because I'm sure people are interested in your hermit stories. As far as where it's going next, are you planning on doing more for your show? Are you planning on putting together for another book, or like what's kind of the future as far as like your hermit research goes?
This took 3 years out of my life. Besides the photos in the book, it's heavily illustrated with my drawings. I'm very proud of them. I think it's the best illustrations I've done for any of my books. But it was hard. Like this, running a podcast and doing these other creative things that I do, and then having this kind of research on top of it. There was a lot of pressure to get, I'm not Stephen King. People wait forever for the next Stephen King book. Mm-hmm. If I don't publish something every so often, people forget I'm an author. That's the way I feel about it anyway. So for me to take a 3-year break, basically, and do this research and dedicate it to this book was a lot. Mm-hmm. I'm happy for it. I'm very proud of it, but I can't see doing another one right away. Maybe sometime down the line. There'll definitely be more hermit shows on Strange Familiars. We actually have one planned that we're going to take a road trip and do that at some point. But for now, as far as books goes, like I said, I might do the little John Stink book by itself. But other than that, hermits sometime down the lane. I got to get back to Bigfoot and some of these other paranormal ideas I have.
Back into the bizarre range, if I dare say so. But if anybody wanted to come and find your books, they wanted to come and check out your podcast, they possibly even wanted to contact you to share some folklore stories or other connections they might have with some of the stuff you're researching, where can people come and find you at, and where can people find your work?
So just go to strangefamiliars.com. And all of those links go to me, and you'll find links there like to my Etsy shop where you can get my books. You can get signed copies if you want. You can find links. I think I have links to my Amazon author page too, if you prefer to get them that way. But there's links, of course, the podcast is there. Pretty much everything I do is there at strangefamiliars.com. That's the easiest place.
Well, we definitely appreciate you making the time to come on the show today, man. It was a wonderful conversation, and we're hopefully looking forward to getting to do another one with you in the future.
Just let me know when. Happy to do it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Timothy, for coming on tonight. Like I said, it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to talk to you, and I really enjoyed picking your brain. I hope I didn't annoy you too much, but thank you.
Not at all. Thank you for having me.
If you guys enjoyed today's conversation and want to show some love, smash that follow icon and share today's episode with a friend. Grassroots support from listeners like you is exactly how this show grows, so thank you.
And if you guys want to get up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shayn, tell them how they can do that.
First and foremost, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that we are the most active on. Or you guys can always get a hold of us on our submission form, which of course is available on our Linktree. And the last way that you guys can get a hold of us is through the hotline, and that number is 313-364-1551. It doesn't matter how you get a hold of us, just make sure that you guys get a hold of us.
And you guys also be sure to show some love to our sponsors and friends of the show. We've got I Know Squatch, our buddies Rick and Hans for all your squatchy gear needs. We've got our buddy Dave with Snarly Yow Natural Products. He's got some awesome beard balm and body wash and things of that nature.
As you can see from this beard over here.
Yes,
every day
very luscious,
getting the snarly yow.
We got Joe with Cryptoteology for all your webbable cryptids and Big Ape Threads.
And don't forget to check out our awesome friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, to pick up some of those awesome bits of paranormal investigating equipment, or you guys can hit up Oregon-ite. And the last one you guys can check out is Sticker Mule. And all of those, of course, have additional discounts and credits available, and more information on those is available down in that show description.
And all this shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And with that, I have to remind you guys every single show, because we definitely keep it bizarre. So hopefully, on the off days that you guys aren't listening to the show, you guys are remaining bizarre every single day of your lives. And just in case you forgot, I'll have to remind you again to always, always stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
Santa Claus is a Sasquatch?